It's Radio Skid Row 88.9 and you're listening to Good Smoke. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Remember that number 95509552. Also www.radioskidrow.org. Also goodsmoke.com.au and all the rest of it, all the social medias, we're all up in there, so check that out. I want to do a big thank you to all the people that rocked up to the party on Saturday. It was, unfortunately I couldn't make it, I had work, but I had a talk to Niall just before me. He said it went really well, so shout out to all the people that were there. Okay, let's not get too carried away. Today is a very exciting day for me because I've been looking for this for about 2 weeks now. So if you haven't already looked at our Facebook, there's a little post there that I posted up about we've connected with the Rocks Ghost Tour, people over there in the Rocks, and we connected with them, and we've got one of their tour guides here today, and we're going to talk about true ghost stories that happen in Sydney, and maybe ones that you've heard and some that you haven't. And we've got this nice show lined up for you guys today. So no further ado, we've got our tour guide here today to take us through all the ghost stories, all the history, and a little bit about his personal life as well. It's Phil from the Rocks Ghost Tour. How are you, Phil?
How you going?
Good. If you just grab that mic in front of you, yeah, man, handle that. How you doing today?
Not too bad.
How was it finding the place?
Look, it took me a little bit longer than I thought to find it. You're sort of right around the back, aren't you?
Right in the corner here.
Bit of a trek. I mean, I don't know. It's a really interesting looking community centre you've got here. Really quite taken back by it. It's there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here.
So much. I'm glad that you found it as well, and you think the same, because a lot of people don't know this spot unless they are invited here or they walk past us. So,
it's a really extraordinary looking location. You've got everything from community, vegetable sales to, obviously to radio stations to martial arts centres to, it's like a little sub-city within
it's beautiful here. There's also like the recycling thing for bottles here as well that they have here, and a school for the Greek dancing, I think, is also. So after, if we have time, I'll take you for a little tour around here.
Oh, cool. No, I'd be very interested to see that.
Yeah, for sure. We'll go for a little walk. So let's get into you, Phil. We've been talking. I've been lining this up for about 2 weeks. I've been researching. I've been looking at all the stories that are happening out there. Before we get into the juicy stuff, I want to know about you a little bit and what you do, and what's the future for you and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, it's sort of what I mean. Firstly, I'll tell you about my day job. I mean, I've got a little counselling business over and hypnotherapy business over in Crow's Nest. So during the day I see clients and I practice emotionally focused counselling. I'm just finishing off a qualification in that at the moment. And I also practice hypnotherapy, so I help people to obviously stop smoking and help them to deal with fears and phobias and everything like that. Which is kind of unusual in a sense, because when I'm taking the ghost tours, I guess I'm instilling fear.
Exactly.
And my day job, I'm trying to take it away.
It's good for your business, right?
No, it's fine. It works. It's good. And it's, it's fun. I mean, ghost tours are fun, taking people on tours of the Rocks and talking to them about the history of the Rocks as well, because that's also something a lot of people are interested in. I'm interested in early Australian history, let's say 1788 to 1850, the convict period. Something which I think is very interesting. It's also very brutal.
100%.
And very, quite a dark period in our history, which we don't like to talk about, but I think we should talk about. Right?
And we can talk about it today.
We can talk about it today.
You were in sociology, weren't you? You studied that sort of stuff?
I studied social research years ago at the University of New South Wales.
Nice.
We're going back 1989 to 1992, so a fair while ago now.
Nice.
But I did a degree economic history and all the really practical things that you would need to become a ghost host. It's got nothing to do with it. Actually. No way related.
But your interest for history it helps. So
it definitely does.
Gives you that passion.
Everything kind of ties in. And
before
working for ghost tours, I was doing history tours for Urban Adventures.
Oh wow!
And in exactly the same area, the same districts.
Nice, okay.
So that gave me a bit of a background. And sort of the confidence, I guess, to hold tours and to whole tours with groups of people and things like that, and to manage groups of people, and we get up to 40 people sometimes on tours.
Wow.
So you need to know how to manage a big group of people and, keep the thing under control and all that sort of thing. So, so I think that sort of prepared me to do that sort of stuff. But in the past, I also had an interest in acting and theatre and things like that.
Wow.
So that also ties in because obviously there's a bit of theatrical stuff involved as well. There's a bit of theatre in it.
That's right. Yeah.
And,
Well, on Good Smoke here, we always talk about like how we always go through our journeys in life and we pick up things along the way and we think, oh, these are useless. That's not going to be used for anything. But not realising it all comes together as we get older. So
exactly.
It's interesting that you say that. So it's like our theme here about the show here about people making it out of their so-called failures, or they think it's nothing in their life that's important, but it becomes one of the cornerstones.
Yeah, it becomes something that is, I like presenting information,
Yeah.
I like getting up in front of groups, and I think I like teaching. I like, presenting information to people, and so I like being a bit of an educator.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I guess that ties in. And the other thing that I think is useful here is, when we do the ghost tours, what we're really doing is we're stimulating people's imagination. And it's amazing because if you just do a straight history tour, you might get 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
If you do a ghost and history tour, you might get 30 or 40 people.
Wow.
So there's something about the unknown, something about the possibility or the prospect of the supernatural, whatever it is, it really kind of taps into people's imagination and makes them a lot more interested, I think.
Yeah. Especially like with religion and stuff like that, you always got that mysticism sort of thing behind everything. So, and I think it adds a beautiful dimension to life as well. Yeah, it keeps us mysterious, like keeps us on our toes, sort of thing.
Yeah. Look, I think you're really nailing it there because. The thing that's sort of fascinating is, one of the things I do at the very beginning of my tour is I say, who here believes in ghosts, right? And, sometimes you'll have a night where virtually everyone will put their hand up. And sometimes you'll have a time where no one puts their hand up. If I have a situation where I have it's a little bit mixed, I have a bit of a joke. Yeah. I say, so you have a few people. I said, can you leave your hand up if you don't believe in ghosts? Yeah. And I look at these people and I say, why are you on a ghost tour?
Yeah, exactly. Why are you here for?
What are you here for?
True, so
yeah. So and they might come back with something like that, but a lot of the time I think they don't really know, to be coldly honest. I think even a lot of the people who say they're very sceptical of this sort of stuff are still interested on some level. There's something on some level, maybe one part of them dismisses it completely. Yeah. But another part of them is curious. Yeah. It's curious about the unknown. It's curious about something they don't totally understand or, a kind of, something uncanny about life.
That's right.
Because I think all of us have had uncanny experiences in our life,
For sure.
Have taken different forms. But, even the most rational person, I think, has often had some uncanny experiences in their life.
Yeah. There's that curiosity in man, I think, like they always, no matter what, you tell them not to do something, they'll go check it and find out what's over behind the corner or something. So there's always a curiosity in man, So I think that's one of the things of why this show here, I'm trying to be curious about Australia with different perspective of not thinking I know it all, right? And walking around, think like everything with a fresh eyes sort of thing. So let's go back a bit when you're talking about you're doing hypnotherapy.
That's correct, yeah.
And you just told me that just before we started the show, and I was thinking to myself when you told me, it's like, this so ties into the ghost story thing.
Yeah, well, it sort of does because when you think about it, I guess when you're telling ghost stories, and one thing that I do on my tours is I try and give people what I call a felt sense experience, a sensory experience of it, because I want the people who believe in ghosts and who are into it, I want them to have a sensory experience. I want them to sort of go down onto the sites. I want them to feel things and experience things, and they do, We have people feeling that they've been touched. We have people telling me that, even sceptical people say this, and we have people feeling that they've heard a voice, and sometimes, much more rarely, they think they've seen something. But most commonly, people feel heaviness, or they feel tingling, or they feel really dizzy. Sometimes they get a brief headache or something like that. It's not unpleasant. But they're weird experiences. They're not terrifying experiences.
They're not everyday experiences either.
No, they're not. Yeah. And I think that I always try and make sure we have those experiences on the tour.
Yeah.
And so, I guess, you could look at it and say, well, maybe he's just dealing with the unconscious mind. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just being I'm not trying to use anything exotic. I'm certainly not trying to use hypnosis, but maybe there's a sort of an autosuggestion there just with the environment and the evocative, it could very well be. Yeah. Or it might be that we're really tapping into something a little bit more mysterious, because it's interesting to note that on all of these sites that we go to, there have been weird things reported on a lot of the tours since the tours began, and a long time before the tours, because these are the stories that we tell are based, have built up pretty much over the last couple of 100 years in the Rocks district. And people have been having experiences on these sites for generations and have been reporting things.
Wow. And
so this is based on, a lot of these stories are based on information that's been handed down. Now, the people who started the business was actually people living in Housing Commission, Brian and Colette, probably about 12 years ago now. They weren't people with a great deal of money, and they just came up with this idea of doing ghost tours around the Rocks. And a lot of people were very cynical about it. They didn't really think they were going to be successful, but they kicked it off, and it was a kind of a passion. It was a certain labour of love, I guess.
Yeah.
And they moved into the ghost business, so to speak, and they did extremely well. And over the last 5 years, the business was actually they eventually retired from the business, and it was purchased by Wes Radish and Rich Hopkins, and so they've been running the business ever since.
I spoke to Wes. Wes is an awesome guy, very, very open guy, and he got you here as well. As soon as I spoke to him, he goes, "I know the man for the job," and he gave me your number. So,
very good.
Yeah, so he's a gentleman. So down at, I'll be honest with you, down at the Rocks, ever since I was a young boy going down, my parents used to take me down there, watch the Harbour Bridge, whatever. But there was always been an eeriness, and I've never known about ghost stories. I don't even know the history down there till this day. Like, I know bits and pieces as I grow up, but there's always been an eeriness there, darkness in the nighttime.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like with all the old Housing Commission places there. They're beautiful looking places too, but there's always been like a feel there for me. And I believe there's spirits and ghosts, so we get that out the way. So I think knowing that since a young kid, being in that like mindset of spirits and ghosts and stuff like that, always had like an inkling to feel it wherever I go. And when I ever went to the Rocks for like a party or something, there was always that like darkness there. What is some history in the Rocks that we don't know that people be surprised about? Because that place is a very beautiful built place. There's a lot of history, like very pioneering pubs there. Can you take us through a bit of history?
Well, history of the Rocks is incredible. In a weird sort of way, it begins with the end of the American Revolutionary Wars in 1784. And the Revolutionary Wars wrap up in the United States, not to Britain's advantage. And Britain needs somewhere to send their undesirables. And who are their undesirables? Well, they're American revolutionaries. They're Irish revolutionaries who don't like the British. There are poor people living on the Thames in hulks, living out. You've got a whole class of Britons dependent on crime for their sustenance. There's no social security. Right? And so, let's say between 1788 and 1850, there's the greatest period of forced migration in human history, and that's the transportation of almost 200,000 people to Australia, right? And it's something we don't talk about in Australia because we're a bit ashamed of it, but we should talk about it now.
Yeah,
At this
for
stage,
sure.
we should talk about it. And so, where did they settle? Well, they were originally headed for Botany Bay, but they ended up coming into what we now call the Rocks. That's pretty much where the fleet arrived, the first 11 ships of the first fleet. And they pulled in with 700 convicts on 26th of January 1788, which we call Australia Day or Invasion Day, depending on your politics.
Yeah, that's right.
But they raised the Union Jack down in front of what is now Customs House, and a version of the Union Jack, which is an absolute replica of the original flag that was raised on the 26th of January 1778, is flying there right now as we speak. Right?
And whereabouts that is?
That's just outside Customs House.
Customs House.
Customs House,
On the
down
Rock,
just outside Circular Quay Railway Station.
Okay, yeah.
And so it was declared to be the land of the crown, right? Now, of course, there was the Gadigal and the Camberwell people that had been there for 40,000 years, but the Spanish also thought it was theirs. So so the interesting thing is this all ties in with your question about the rocks. This is going to give you a really good background.
Yeah, for sure.
See, the Spanish claimed Australia in about 1494. They divided up the world with Portugal, and they said, "Oh, look, we know there's Terra Australis here. We know it exists, but it hasn't been." The Portuguese had mapped the top end. The Indonesians had been coming here for about 1,000 years. Chinese claim they were here 2,000 years ago. There's no evidence for that, and a bit of a concerning claim. But so the Spanish said, "Well, look, we want this place when it's mapped and when it's ready for settlement," sort of thing. And so when the British turned up and they declared it in the name of the Crown, they automatically expected there could be a war with Spain.
Okay.
And so they put 18-pounders, very powerful cannons, which are strong enough to tear through the armour on a Spanish galleon, and they dotted them around Dawes Point, which is directly underneath the pylon of the harbour bridge. Right? Now, those cannons that were placed there were a pretty powerful deterrent, because a couple of years later, Mesopina, the Spanish explorer, came down to Sydney on what was supposedly a diplomatic mission, but it wasn't. It was a spying mission. And so the galleons sailed into the harbour and they looked up into the Rocks district of Sydney, what we now call the Rocks, and they saw the 18-pounder cannons pointing back at them. They thought maybe invading this place isn't such a good idea. Those cannons are still there right now.
Wow.
If you jump in a car and you drive half an hour from where we are right now, I can show you Dawes Point Fort. Those cannons are there, still waiting for the Spanish to turn up.
We're still waiting.
Pretty effective. So the Rocks is really, really important to Australia because it's where the convicts were first dumped. It's where they had no tents, they had no shelter. They cut into the sandstone with their hand tools in Foundation Park. And there's so much stuff there that's evocative, and there's so much horrible stuff, so much brutal stuff. And as you said yourself, when you walk around there of a night, you feel something. You sense darkness in certain areas. You know, I have people coming to me on the tours and they say, "Look, we were up at Foundation Park this afternoon. I was there with my son and he started behaving strangely." I said, "How old's your son?" "Oh, he's 10 years of age." And I'll tell them a story, even though it's not specifically on my tour. I'll tell them a story about Foundation Park if they bring it up. And I'll just say to them, "Well, look, there were gangs in Sydney from about 1804 until the First World War. They were the push. And your son was actually in Foundation Park. He's 10 years of age. Well, in 1820, the push gangs that would mug people and kill them, right?
Wow.
They were called the push because they'd go into pubs and bars in a V formation and they'd physically push everyone out of the way. Now, they consisted of young men who were known as larrikins, young women who were known as donners. The donners were ladies of the night, right? They were bait.
Donners, okay.
They were bait. They were for attracting young men that the push were going to mug, right? Simple as that.
Wow.
Very, very evil stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, the push had another policy, and that was if anyone witnessed a push crime, they would kill them, right?
Oh,
This 10-year-old boy witnessed a push crime. His age made no difference to them. They threw him at the age of 10 head first off a cliff in Foundation Park, killed him, right? His mother, young mother in her 20s at the time, died of shock several days later. Now, the security guys, the Rock security forces, of a night when they walk through Foundation Park, they actually claim they often see a young woman weeping on one of the benches. And when they approach her, she fades away.
Get out.
Now, many people believe that is the ghost of this poor boy's mother. Now, that crime was so nasty that even the push felt a little bit guilty about it. Not they felt guilty about too many things, but even some of those guys had turned up to the boy's funeral. But that just shows you the ruthlessness of those gangs. They were wicked. And they'd attract that when the young Marines and the young sailors and the young whalers would pull into the harbour. And the young donners would go down to the boats. And obviously these were young men. Sex drive was high. They'd been out to sea for months. They were cashed up, probably desiring a bit of female intimacy. Yeah. And the girls would approach them and offer them a good time. And they'd lure them up the alleyways, places like the Suez Canal, this is, I always take people to the Suez Canal and I tell them about the push, because the push turn up in different forms in the tour. And they would lure these young men up the alleyways, offering them a good time. Then when I got to an intersection, they'd signal to their mates, the larrikins. Larrikins would come out. They would do something called sandbagging. Well, now, sandbagging is where you have a sock packed tight with sand, and you beat the poor young man would be beaten unconscious or beaten to death. I always say to the group, why do you think they use the sock filled with sand? People don't really, some people come up with it. But the reason they did that is it was a concealed weapon, because what they would do is they'd empty the sand out of the sock and they'd put the sock back on their foot, or they'd put the sock back on the foot of the victim. So when the cops turned up, as they would, and they'd see the dead or unconscious young man, and the push gang members would never run from the scene of a crime. They'd just hang around looking cool or pretend they were good Samaritans or whatever. They were pretty deviant. And the cops would automatically search the push guy member for weaponry. And when they searched him for weaponry, he had no weaponry. So there was no evidence that he had a club or he had an instrument for belting this guy unconscious or killing him, and so they had no grounds for taking him to court. Nothing.
Yeah.
So they were cunning. They had all these little cunning methods. And that even ties in to an extent with my own personal history, because my grandfather went down to the rocks when he was about 20 years of age. That would have been 1923. And in those days, you really had to have your wits about you, because if you didn't know the ropes around there, and if you couldn't identify the push, who normally dressed well, by the way, they were
three-piece suits, and
they looked good.
Yeah.
They didn't
little
look like
pocket watches and stuff.
Exactly. I could show you a photograph of them right now, and they look like they're members of a gentleman's club.
Yeah,
you never ever get the impression that they were thugs or
just everyday citizens.
They would look like respectable citizens. That was part of their stick, their ploy.
Wow. Okay.
And a couple of these blokes approached him, and they said to him, "Have you got a match, mate?" Right. And he automatically, because what one of their techniques was, you'd go to be a good Samaritan, you'd go to light this bloke's pipe. They'd belt you over the back of the head. They're nasty. And he recognised who they were, and he said, "Well, match me." And he's a good short distance runner, and he ran up George Street, and they chased him. They didn't get him, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you now. So, that was a sort of, I think about that. I think, for God's sake, that was my own family's direct connection with the push.
Yeah. And now you're talking about it.
Talking about these guys. A lot of them were wiped out in the First World War, and in the Second World War they were drafted off to battle in Germany and France, and they pretty much wiped them out. But they weren't nice people. They were incredibly tough people. There's no doubt about it. If you were in a push gang, you had to know how to fight. You had to be a good bare-fisted knuckle fighter, and you would start at the bottom of you'd sort of fight your way up depending on your skill. If you were really good, you'd get to lead a gang.
Wow.
And then you'd fight for territory with members of other push gangs. They'd fight off.
Yeah.
And they'd delineate territory.
Wow.
And so you'd have like the Suez Canal, which is still there. It's an alleyway in the rocks. You'd have the Suez Canal push gang. Right? And then you'd have like the Milson's Point push gang. And you'd have the Argyle Cut push gang, and so they'd have all the little territories. And naturally, if you go to the rocks these days, it's beautifully illuminated with LED lights of a night and everything like that. So it'd be pretty hard to mug anyone.
That's right.
But in those days, of course, it wouldn't have been lit at all.
Yeah,
it would have been a very dark foreboding place. And so, if you were a local and you knew the ropes and you knew how to identify the push, you'd be all right.
Exactly.
But if you were just an out-of-towner, or you were a young man stepping off a boat, you were in a lot of danger if you didn't know what you were doing. If you didn't know how to protect yourself.
For sure.
You're very vulnerable.
Man, this is so interesting. I've got so many questions. I'm going to go to some music, have a bit of a break. We'll get back to our bearings. And then, and we'll get back into some more stories. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 9550-9552. I've taken the phone off the hook, so then you can not ring while we're having this interview, but I'm putting it back on now. So call that number, 9550-9552. Also, radioskidrow.org and goodsmoke.com.au. Check out our Facebook. Follow the links for supporting the radio station. Also, I put the links to the ghost tours, and you can check out the website there, and you can find out when the tours are on and all the rest of the information that's up there. I'm going to play some music, and we're going to get into some more stories about the rocks and about the history of Australia. This is Radio Skid Row 88.9. It's Radio Skid Row 88.9, and you're listening to Good Smoke. Remember that number, 95509552, also radioskidrow.org and goodsmoke.com.au. Our guest today is from the Rocks Ghost Tour down in Sydney in the Rocks. Obviously, it's in the name. If you can check out ghosttours.com.au, I've put the link up on our Facebook. Follow the links there. There's a little promo video they did do. They present some of the stories there, what you might get in the little tour that you go on there. And also there's a little interesting picture that I put up there. I know you guys are waiting for that, but I'll be speaking about that towards the end of the show, so keep tuned for that. So we've been here with Phil talking about the history of the Rocks, what's been going on down there, what went on in the past, and and we're going to keep going down that road and see. Remember, if you have any questions, call that number while the music's playing, and I'll get those questions asked. If you have any music that you want to request, I'll make sure to play it for you, any shout-outs, all that sort of stuff. If you're still interested in this, keep tuned on 88.9, and it's a good smoke. Phil, I'm loving what's happening here.
Cool.
A great conversation. Let's talk about the Suez Canal and what was that all about, because I've got a bit of history about that. It's a nice little alleyway, like you were talking about, where the pushers and that used to go down. And it's like sandstone, like old heritage style, Federation style, sort of style. And there's some interesting stories that happen down there. Take us down that alley of history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was created as a result of a subdivision in about 1840. It's... I can't help but feel that it's probably named after the Suez Canal. Would have to be.
Yeah.
There's a sort of some people have said that it was related more to the fact that a lot of sewage used to be tipped there, because there's a sort of like a multi-story building right next to it that was accommodation. It was also a well-known brothel at the time for many years. And the locals... Of course, there's no sewage system in those days, and the locals used to shout "gazunda," which means it goes under the bed. Right? In other words, a chamber pot. And they'd yell out "gazunda." So if you're a bit hard of hearing, or you just didn't hear it, it didn't help you a great deal, because people would just chuck their chamber pot contents directly out of the window, and of course it would land in the alleyway, and would just make its way down, sort of trickle its way down to the harbour. So very little hygiene by modern standards,
sure.
And in those days people just didn't think in terms of hygiene. And it's kind of sort of interesting, because in these days, of course, the closer you are to the water, the more money you pay for something and the more exclusive and prestigious it was. But in those days, especially in the Rocks, you really didn't want to be down by the water, because all the sewage used to flow from the built-up areas, the areas up on the hill. And you'd get all the flies and the roaches and everything like that. So by the time you got down to the waterfront, it was pretty damn filthy. And it was as rough as hell. So people wanted to be further up the, further up the escarpment, so to speak, because you were better off.
Did that happen all up North Sydney as well, like along the beaches there?
Oh, look, I would think so. I would think that sort of stuff was pretty common, and probably maybe not, anywhere where you had apartment blocks and things like that. The Rocks was built up from the early days. Yeah, probably the first place where you actually had multi-storey accommodation and things like that in Sydney, and where you had a lot of people crammed in together. When the plague broke out in 1900. It was the area that was largely resumed, because there were a lot of slums down there and a lot of people living down there, and there were lots of rats because it was down by the water. So as soon as bubonic plague broke out, they demolished half the area and killed thousands of rats, because, obviously the fear of plague was there were no antibiotics.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the fear of plague was very, very serious, even though it only killed a few people. But, I think a couple of hundred people got sick. A few died, but that would have been very scary in those days, because of the fear of plague from Europe and everything like that. Going back to the Suez Canal, the Suez Canal was probably one of the most dangerous alleyways in Australia for about 100 years, because the Rocks push were active in that region, and it was a perfect location for mugging people, and especially for mugging young men as they came off the boats. And it's right next to another little side street called Nurses Walk. And Nurses Walk was, of course, the location of the first hospitals in Australia.
Nurses Walk. Okay.
Nurses Walk. So you've got to you had ships coming into Sydney, ships like the Charlotte, right? So that left Portsmouth with about 1,100 people on board. About 333 died on the voyage out to Australia. And by the time that boat turned up in Sydney, there are only 100 people fit for work. So when you think about it, you say 333 died, so you had about 700 and something left. And then out of those, 600 of them were so ill when they turned up and so weak, they just put them in tent hospitals.
Wow.
And the thing is, if you were in one of these tent hospitals and your mate next to you passed away, you'd actually prop him up and talk to him, pretend he was still alive, because you'd get his rations as well. You'd get double rations. So it just shows you that food shortages in those days were pretty terrible.
It's rugged, eh?
It was rugged as hell.
Dirty, yeah.
And a lot of these people were dying of diseases like scurvy.
Yeah.
Scurvy's caused by lack of vitamin C. And it's interesting to note that just one medium-sized serving of fries from McDonald's has enough vitamin C in it to actually cure scurvy. So it just shows you how bad the food would have been.
There was so shortage,
If you'd been on a boat for 8 months and you had just been given tea, and maybe they would have had salted fruit and pork, but they wouldn't have. It probably would have got so mouldy, especially in the warm climates, they would have chucked it out. So you would have had biscuits, mouldy biscuit and tea. Now, if someone feeds you on that for 8 months, you're going to be in a pretty bad way.
Very bad way, yeah.
If you survive at all.
For your intestines and stuff.
Your immune system's going to shut down.
Done, yeah.
It's just not going to work.
No nutrients, So this was the conditions for the first fleet that came here.
Oh, yeah, the first probably up until about... things started improving, I think, in the 1820s, but for the first 30 or 40 years, it was pretty tough getting out to Australia.
It's very harsh to come down,
Yeah, and when you got here, it was pretty tough as well.
So how many, say, Englishmen that were bringing them down, how many did they survive? Like, were they on good food, or was it...
They'd be looking after the officers a whole lot better than they're looking after the convicts because they needed them to administer when they got here. Yeah. But, the first hospital arrived from Scotland and on the second fleet, made out of copper and canvas, a tent hospital, and that was set up at the beginning of I think it was late in 1788. They had the first sort of makeshift hospitals erected and sort of operational. And then Sydney Hospital was finished in 1816.
Oh, okay.
So that's well over 200 years.
Yeah.
And so that's the first really operational public hospital in Australia.
Did they have records of like first encounters from the natives to
Look, here's the thing. When the first fleet came into Sydney, and Arthur Phillip himself, the first governor of New South Wales, who commandeered the first fleet, was really fascinated by the Aboriginal people. He thought they were really interesting. And they were fascinated to see these white people as well, who they'd never seen before, of course.
In their life, yeah.
And initially, I think relations were good between the two groups. And but over time, I think relationships break down because, bear in mind, a lot of the Britons that came down here were members of a poor criminal class. And so they decided they were going to go fishing. They needed some canoes. Guess where they found them? Well, they pinched some local Gadigal canoes for half a day or something. Yeah. They probably didn't mean any real harm from doing it, but still that would have resulted in clashes. And also in 1810, there was an outbreak of smallpox. And of course, the Gadigal people we have a certain natural immunity, but they had no immunity.
For sure.
And so that wiped out a lot of the Gadigal people. And there was, some of the extreme radicals have suggested that it was deliberate, but the British they definitely wouldn't have known enough about bacteriology in those days to do that. Yeah. And it's also interesting to note that a lot of people were very traumatised by this. They saw the Gadigal people dying all around them and they were quite shaken up by it.
For sure.
And so there were diary entries. They're trying to work out how to stop it or how to prevent it, but they really couldn't because, the virus is just something you carry with you. And if you walk into a community that has no resistance, it's just, it's what happens. Yeah.
So what was the plan? Like, were they bringing them here, throwing them off, or were they going to bring them here, throw them off and then leave?
You can
move the mic if you want.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Closer to you if you want to sit back and relax.
Yeah. The plan was really to create a colony, to create a penal colony, and to also source resources from Australia as well. Norfolk Island pines made wonderful masts for tall ships and for man of wars and things like that. And so shipbuilding was one of our first industries.
Okay.
We were building tall ships here and British military ships and things like that.
I didn't
were
know
also
that.
being built here, And so, there was there are a number of reasons for settling Australia, but also because it's a continental landmass. It's almost the size of the United States.
Yeah.
It's a physically big place.
For sure.
And there's lots. You might as well grab it,
Well, it's here, they say.
Because otherwise someone else will definitely grab it.
That was the attitude back then,
Yeah. And so you might as well seize it. So the Rocks area is inextricably tied in with the history of Australia. And, you talk about coming back to the ghost tours, you talk about the eeriness of the area and the sense that the area feels haunted and everything like that. Well, it does. It does feel haunted.
No, for sure. Like, especially where Argyle is, that causeway sort of thing.
It's interesting you should mention the Argyle Cut because that was originally cut by convicts in 1840. And the tunnel was originally hand cut. Right?
Oh, really? So that's one big stone.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of
it was expanded. It was expanded later on with gelignite and things like that as they actually cut through the sandstone, blasted with gelignite and things like that in the 1850s.
Oh.
But originally the convicts tried to cut through just with hand tools, but they couldn't do it. And but they eventually got through because it was the only way of connecting. Well, it wasn't the only way, but it was a way of connecting Sydney Harbour to Darling Harbour, which were the two big ports at the time.
Okay.
Darling Harbour is where you went to catch your boats back to Britain and things like that after your sentence was over, if you wanted to return to Britain.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
many
that.
of them did want to return to Britain.
Because of the weather?
Probably because of the weather. The weather and the beer's warm.
Yeah.
Reasons for not going back.
Yeah.
Well, the main reason is they had a good deal in Australia because in 1810, Lachlan Macquarie actually gave you a plot of farming land, once you'd completed your sentence. You got free farming land.
Really?
So that was a pretty damn good deal.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not going to get free land. No one's going to be giving you free land in Sydney today. It's not going to happen.
No way. Especially around there as well.
Especially around there, yeah.
I think they just kicked all the people out there to make new buildings there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you got a pretty good deal. And this existed up until, I think it's about the 1830s, and then they turned it into a low-interest loan scheme or something, but it was still pretty fair-minded.
What was the wisdom behind?
The wisdom behind it was actually very radical for the time. It was Lachlan Macquarie's belief that these people had come from a very poor background, and it was a reformist policy. The whole idea was to give them the idea was that if you could give these people resources, and you actually gave them the opportunity to develop their own farm or their own commerce, or basically giving them an even money break in life, that they would make good. And many of them did just that. It was a very successful policy. Yeah.
Did that extend out to just the white Australian, or was it for everybody there?
Oh, look, I'm quite sure it would have been for white Australians. I don't think the Gadigal people would have been interested in modern farming anyway. They were hunter-gatherers, and they had been essentially for thousands of years. They had been fishing, and
that's right,
probably growing their own crops in their own indigenous methods and things like that.
Yeah, I heard of that stuff. The ancient ways of making vegetables or fruits out in the desert, sort of thing.
Yeah,
there's a guy that's I'm trying to get him on here, where he's bringing back those old methods and trying to instill it in the community again. That's
a very interesting. That is all very interesting. Yeah. But so no, they had a subsistence lifestyle. So the notion of farming methods and things like that wouldn't have been
foreign to them. Yeah,
would have been foreign to them. Yeah.
There was I used to do a little bit of security work in the city, towards the Rocks. Like, well, not do you know the establishment? On George Street. I was around there. So I'd go down there, go to Pancakes on the Rock sometimes and get something to eat. And there's what was it? I forgot. Yeah, where the Argyle is. No, sorry, you go through the Argyle, that little tunnel, and then you turn, I think, left up the top, and it's the Battle of Waterloo or
Hero of Waterloo. The Hero of Waterloo. That's a great old pub. It's 1843 convict era.
Is that the first pub in Australia?
No.
Okay.
All the pubs in the Rocks claim they're the first.
Yeah, that's okay.
The oldest pub in Australia is the Mason Arms in Parramatta.
Mason
Arms. It's been licensed since about 1792.
Okay.
And it was started by an ex-convict. So that is the oldest pub in Australia. The oldest license, certainly it would have to be in Australia. But no, none of the pubs in the Rocks are the oldest pub in the Rocks.
Those are fake news.
Yeah, they're definitely fake news. Fake news from the pubs anyway. But the Hero of Waterloo was built in 1843, and it was named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wesley, who had won the battle with Napoleon, right? Mm. And so if you go into the Hero of Waterloo and you go up onto the first floor, they've got a room called the Duke Room, and they've got the Duke of Wellington, a big tall painting of the Duke of Wellington up on the wall, looking terribly proud of himself. And then on the other wall, they've got Napoleon looking rather downcast and rather defeated. He's obviously lost the battle.
That's right.
And you've got, churches burning in the background and things like that,
victory and glory.
Yeah, total victory and glory and, stepping over the bodies of Napoleon soldiers and all sort of stuff. And so he was a revered figure at the time, and he became the Prime Minister of Britain. So, but that was also the pub of the garrison, the Dawes Point Garrison, which, as I said earlier, was originally built to protect us from Spanish invasion. Right. So they built a church on the corner. I think the correct name of that church is the Holy Trinity. It was also known as the Garrison Church. That was built in 1840. Hero of Waterloo was built in 1843. Now, the interesting thing about the Hero, there's a ghost story associated with that as well. And it's actually the story of Anne Kirkman, who was the wife of the first licensee of the pub. Now, Thomas Kirkman was a pretty ruthless bloke. And what they used to do is they used to Shanghai people. Now, what I mean by Shanghai means that Shanghai, as it sort of implies, you're being taken off to Shanghai. You drug someone and you pull them through a smuggling tunnel, and then you load them up onto a tall ship. So it might be that I'm a tall ship's captain, and I'm in, I come into Sydney in 1843, and I decide I need 4 or 5 young men just to do deckhand work on my boat, but I'm not keen on the idea of paying for them. So I approach Thomas Kirkman. I say, Thomas, I need 4 young men for tomorrow night. That's right, Phil. Give me your 20 shillings. And I put my 20 shillings on the table. And he would wait until a group of young men got a little bit too merry, had a bit too much to drink. And then he would offer them a round on the house. And that round on the house, it might, whatever they were drinking, probably rum, maybe vodka, whatever it was, they'd put some burnt tobacco in the base, and they'd put in some chloroform or some sulfuric acid. And these young men, it wouldn't kill you, or it could definitely kill you, but it was more likely to knock you unconscious.
Pass you out, yeah.
And they'd swig it down. They'd get them to have a sculling competition, and then these young men would collapse on the bar, and they would drop them through trapdoors, which are still there, and down into a smuggling tunnel. Right,
wow.
And that smuggling tunnel is still there, right?
Yeah.
So if you go to the Hero of Waterloo,
you can walk through.
You can actually see the smuggling tunnels.
Wow.
You can see all this stuff, and they would drag them through the tunnel, and they would drag them up onto the boats. They'd wake up the following morning, they'd be out to sea.
Far out.
Now, it was sort of like,
what the hell?
Yeah, a bit of a shock, No Facebook or Instagram, no texting, no
iPhones or nothing.
Hey, I'm having a great time. Selfies on out to sea.
Yeah, wow.
Just didn't happen. And so your family would have lost contact with you completely, and you'd be gone for about 7 months. It wasn't like the press gangs of old England where they pressed young men into the Navy and they're in the Navy for life. That was pretty wicked. Yeah. But they did return them. They were very nice sea captains. They actually brought them back to their families.
Okay.
Who would have been pleased to see them 7 months later.
Yeah.
But they would have been expected. And now the crazy thing about it was, as horrible as that sounds to us in the 21st century, back in the 1900s, these same young men would go back to the Hero of Waterloo 12 months later and go back to that same bar, knowing full well
What happened?
what could happen to them and would happen to them again. It was all a bit of an adventure for them.
So they sort of they liked it.
Yeah, they actually got a bit of a kick out. They probably got to go to foreign boards. They didn't have to pay for anything. Had to do a bit of deck work. Probably got drunk and got fed and looked after. Probably met foreign women. Probably had a good time. Or went off to South America or wherever. And so it was a bit of a big gag. So,
so what would you call those guys? What were they?
Oh, I mean, there was no name specifically name for them. No, but I mean, the method was known as Shanghai.
Shanghai. Okay.
Shanghai. So it's a case of you've been shanghaied.
Yeah.
And quite a few young men came to Australia as a result of being shanghaied.
From other countries?
From other countries. And they decided to stay, So, that wasn't uncommon. If you speak to people who've been living here, I spoke to a guy just a few weeks ago. His grandfather had been shanghaied from Spain to Australia. And this is origins of his family in Australia, and his granddad had decided to stay once he was here. Didn't want to go back on the boat. Oh, this place is all right.
Yeah,
I'm going to stay,
Yeah.
And so Australia itself has a very diverse history. Going back to the ghost story associated with that particular pub, it's believed to be one of the most haunted locations in Australia. And we always stop outside the Hero of Waterloo and we tell these stories. And on the Rocks Ghost Tours. So Anne and her husband Thomas had an argument one night, and he became physical, and she fell down the stairs and she broke her neck. So it was deemed to be manslaughter. Probably was almost certainly manslaughter. Now Anne, during her life, was a vibrant young woman. She used to look after the pub while her husband was out and about, a bit of a man about town. He was out doing business deals. There were rumours of infidelity. In fact, when they had the argument that night, she had accused him of infidelity, apparently. She had been a very competent pianist. She used to play the piano, right, quite a lot. Now, the owners of the pub over the last 30 years ago were Ivan and Kazuko Nelson, and they claim that they used to hear the piano, which they used to have down at the pub, playing by itself of a night.
Get out of here.
And they used to go down there and they found that, the lid was flipped up on it, but it wasn't actually playing. They got so annoyed by this, they actually relocated that piano down into the dungeon area. So if you have a look at the Hero, you'll see that piano down in the dungeon area. Yeah. And they've also got shackles down there.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is that it's also interesting to note that the Discovery TV crew, Discovery Channel, did a ghost investigation on the Hero of Waterloo, and one of the cameramen, when he was actually down in the cellar area, which is kept sealed off, claimed he saw a woman floating above him.
Get out!
Now, he got so freaked out by this, he refused to continue with the photography, so they had to get another cameraman to do the photography. Now, the other thing that's kind of weird is that over the last 28, 30 years, there have also been a whole lot of incidents associated with the women's bathroom there. Now, Kazuko, who's the current owner, who actually doesn't believe in ghosts, but still believes that weird things happen there, claims that there have been at least 20 young women who've walked into the bathroom and they've seen a young woman in period clothing standing behind them in the mirror when they're looking in the mirror.
Far out.
They've turned around to have a look at her and she's gone. Now, this has freaked them out so much, many of them have run from the bathroom screaming, quite traumatised by it. And
I'm shaking. I'm freaked out right now.
Yeah, and we've got creepier stories in this one, and totally freaked out. And she said she doesn't know what's happening, but something is happening.
Yeah.
So something is happening.
Yeah.
So, that's one of our stops on the ghost tours.
Yeah.
We also go. One of the other places that we go to is the dig site. And the dig site is about 150 feet underground. I mean, it's quite a location. It's a location of an 1820s convict era cottage.
Oh, okay.
And
Why so down? Why so?
just simply because of the city has built up.
Oh,
since
okay.
then.
So it was that. I've seen like footage of it, but
Yeah.
it's pretty deep down. Yeah,
It is deep down.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
quite. You go down in like metal stairways.
Yeah.
You got little ghost hunting torches and
Yeah.
things like that.
There's little remnants of people's stuff down there as well. Like they found like little dig like equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. They found a lot of stuff in the archaeological digs, and that is believed to be haunted by the ghost of a young French girl called Amelia Belair's. Now, we've taken photographs down on the site. In fact, I'm actually going to show you
Oh my god.
a photograph right now. And this is, I've just got to give you a warning here. This is a pretty freaky photo. This was actually taken by one of the participants on the ghost tours. And I always get people to use their camera phones because I want them to take photos because I often get creepy stuff on their photos. And it's of a participant standing in a corner. I'll pass it across to you.
Yeah, nice.
And when we got up to the surface, we didn't notice anything unusual when the photograph was being taken. It was only after we got to the surface that people started becoming a bit alarmed about something. And you might like to, as you look at the photo, just describe it to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And people were starting, and I was sort of, what the hell's this all about? And I walked over and I had a look at the photograph and I looked at it closely. And what I want you to do now is just look at that photo.
Oh wow. Get out of here. Are you serious?
No, I'm deadly serious. See, some people look at that and think, oh, is that ghost app or something? No, it's not. That's an actual photograph. Now, we don't know what that is. We actually thought it was a double exposure. In other words, we thought it was the girl standing in the corner and somehow got double exposed. We don't know who that is. Look at the picture a little bit more closely, expand upon it a little bit. And it looks like the head of a young girl of about 26 years of age. Amelia Belair's was about 26. Now, the thing here that is really interesting about that is that Amelia actually passed away in that very location.
In that corner.
In that very corner. That's where her body was found.
Okay, if you're listening, guys, I'm looking at a photo at the moment. There's a lady. She's in a brown jacket and like navy blue pants, and she's facing like a stone wall, and it's like at the corner of the room sort of thing, and it should be her shadow. It should be her shadow.
Theoretically, that's what you would think it is.
Off the light there, but it's too distinct. There's like she's almost smiling as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's almost mocking, and it's sort of the thing that's kind of funny about that is that's sort of what we thought at first. But if you look at the girl standing in the corner and look at the image, it's not the same girl. It's a totally different head.
Yeah.
It's the girl,
the girl that's actually standing there in real life has a bun. And stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whilst the girl in the corner has like a fringe and also has long hair,
long black hair. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a weird distorted image. Now we've got a lot of these.
I want to get that picture so I can put on the video for people to see.
Images here, and there are other things that are a lot more subtle. Like if you look at this as a early evening photo, if you look at the image here in the corner, you see what looks like a young girl.
Oh wow. Yeah.
That was a photograph I took myself, and once again, I didn't find these things until I was off the side. I looked at them later on, and we discovered some of these images. And
far out.
That's
freaky.
That is very freaky. That's very creepy. And I actually had a girl on the tour the other night. That's at a location called Michael Gannon's Cottage. And underneath the cottage, they used to store bodies. And, it's fair to say that in those days, a lot of burials were accidental. People weren't completely dead when they nailed them into coffins because, they didn't have any modern ER or anything like that. And so, when we excavated the Sydney Town Hall about 15 years ago to put in air conditioning, they flipped the lids on a number of the coffins and they actually found scratch marks on the inside of the lids. So people died in their coffins. And so this particular location, we estimate, over about a 30-year period, there could have been 200 people that could have died down there in their coffins, right? And so that is one of the more haunted locations.
Yeah.
What I could do is I get people to walk down the stairway, and in every single tour I take, we get people getting unusual feelings. It can be as little, it can be tingling heaviness, feeling of being touched, of being everyone who stands down there starts swaying.
Get out.
And they don't know. I mean, if you come on the tour, you see it yourself.
Yeah.
They start swaying. They don't even know they're swaying, but it's obvious to everyone else in the group. And I'll point it out.
Far out.
I'll say, look, can you see the swaying? And yeah, she doesn't know she's doing that. And I'll actually say, yeah, Julie, you aware of the fact you're swaying? No. And she's like, it's almost like an invisible force has grabbed her.
Her.
She's pushing her and pulling her, pushing her, pulling. It's quite creepy.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, it really is quite creepy.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they really don't know they're doing it. And it's very common to get this response on the tours. So the only explanation I can come to is they're connecting with something. Now, those people also report tingling sensations, heaviness. Sometimes they feel they can't move their legs. All sorts of things like that happen. And they're okay afterwards.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a bit of a weird experience for them. Very occasionally, you do have people who freak out.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes.
Well, I'm freaking out listening to it.
Yeah.
And especially what I've been through, and then hearing this is like it affirms what I've been through. So I was just going to ask, you said you were in this job, you just started about 18 months ago, was it?
Yep.
So before going into this, were you a ghost believer, spirit believer, religion, anything like that? And
I mean, as a young man, when I say young man, I'm talking like, the ages of 12 to 17 or 18, I did believe in all these things. And as I got older, I didn't believe in these things. And just over the years, what I've come to believe is that there is an uncanny realm, right? And who knows what's in the uncanny realm, right?
Exactly.
We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Is it something we really don't understand? Is it something is it another dimension we don't fully comprehend? Is it something much darker? Is it something demonic that's manipulating us? Is it other ghosts flying around? We don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. But I do know one thing for sure, and that is people have experiences on this site. And the experiences are totally consistent. Like there's a signal station is one of the locations that I take people to. Every single tour I've gone on without any doubt whatsoever. There is it's believed to be haunted by a particular signal master and I can tell you now with absolute certainty that when I take a tour, it doesn't matter if it's 10 people or 30 people or 40 people, there's always a small handful, maybe a substantial handful of people, at least maybe 30% of the people on the tour that have experiences in a particular room. It's always exactly the same room, and it's almost always the same location in the same room. And so after we do a bit of a ghost hunt and I bring everyone to the main room and I say, look, I know for a fact that some of you have experienced something in a location in this top area. And people will start nodding and they'll start pointing towards that room. It's always the same room. They never
so
ever
it's
get
not
it wrong.
they can't ring each other up and say pick that room. It's not a fake thing or anything.
It wouldn't matter if they did because like when the tours are different, each tour is different,
right, yeah.
and they're all from people that are all from all over the world, and there's a lot of them are flying in and flying out of Australia. So no, there's no way they could be connected.
So you're like sort of forced to believe.
No, and I just say to them, look, I didn't even tell them what to experience. I said, what did you experience? And they'll say, look, I felt something in that room. And I said, what did you feel in the room? Tell me what you felt. They said, there was just a darkness in there, or I got a headache, or there was a tingling, or I just felt very uncomfortable in there, or, I thought I saw the floor moving, or you get all this stuff coming from people. And it's always the location that Joe Moffat passed away. Every single tour. No doubt about it. Yeah. It's in that room and they experience that sensation. Not everyone experiences it, admittedly, but there's always a fair chunk of the tour that does, And that's really very convincing. That's really extraordinary. And that leads you to, the Niall, who's the signal master, then a contemporary signal master, will tell you that a lot of the observatory staff will not enter the signal station by themselves. They will have someone with them. Now, he's been there for 30 years. He's an ex-SAS guy. And so ex-SAS blokes aren't the sort of guys who you expect to be particularly flaky. They're very kind of brass tacks. Pretty tough blokes,
that's right.
And yet he will talk to you openly about the experiences people have had in the signal station. and just what he had one member of his staff that went walking down the stairway once and noticed there were two shadows. There was his shadow and someone else's shadow. Well, that bloke didn't come back to work the following day.
He's freaked out.
It freaked him, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And even the observatory staff, they're always well free of the signal station. Niall has been up there for so long; he's just got used to all the weird stuff up there, and so he doesn't worry about it. But it doesn't scare him at all.
Doesn't faze him anymore.
He just doesn't worry about
Worry.
There's a door at the end, the door to the signal master's office, that actually does fly open in the middle of tours. It has genuinely happened. Now, the first time it happened, I wouldn't have believed this if I hadn't seen it. I really honestly wouldn't have believed it. And the first time it happened, Niall and I were talking to the group, and suddenly everyone in the group was flag waving us and pointing to the door. And what the hell's that about? What are they? And then we just kind of ignored it. It was a bit weird. And then after that part of the tour was over, there were a lot of people looking a bit disturbed, looking a bit shaken up.
Yeah, for sure.
And we said, well, what's going on? What's going down? They say, did you see what happened? Then I said, yeah, I can see the doors open. I said, did you see it fling open? I said, well, no, we didn't. We were looking at it. And so, and I know they're telling me the truth. And so it's happened twice since then. And I've actually seen it happen. The door just unlatches and it just flies open. It's like someone's pushing.
So it's locked. It has a latch on it.
Unlatch, and then it goes
far out. So it's not just the door. That's the.
No.
Oh, okay. Wow.
No, it is really weird. And you sort of got to see it to believe it. Now, there might be a more rational explanation for it. Could be it's an old building. The building's moving. There's a lot of the lockers dodgy. There's a build-up of energy in the. This happens, and the lights will flicker on and off. It's not necessarily supernatural. It could just be an engineering issue. If you're a building engineer, you'd probably understand that these things happen, but it's still terribly creepy when it happens.
For sure, yeah, 100. Especially what you're talking about.
Yeah, and especially when you get in to do a sensing exercise or something like that. So look, these are the things that definitely happen on the tours.
All right, let's go to some music. I'll play a few tunes and then we'll come back and wrap it up. We'll talk about you've been in a bit of film and you've done
I did a bit of skirted my way through the film industry. Yeah.
We'll talk about it after the songs and we'll finish off with a nice little ghost story on a little story at the end, which is pretty freaky. This is Radio Skid Row 88.9. I've just been playing music from my laptop today since the internet's a bit low, so I've been playing from the protesters. They've been coming in a few times, so shout out to you guys. Remember that number 9550-9552, radioskidrow.org, goodsmoke.com.au, also Ghost Tours, The Rocks Ghost Tours, .com.au. Check out those guys, and we'll keep plugging it at the end anyway. It's Radio Skid Row. It's Radio Skid Row 88.9. I know I haven't been playing much music today, but that's because we've got a beautiful guest out from The Rocks Ghost Tours, Phil. We've been speaking about the stories down at The Rocks, and I just want to get as much as I can out of him so I can go do some more research because I love these stories. Let's get into something a little bit different, and then we'll finish off with a little amazing, freaky story. You've done a bit of filmmaking in your past. Yeah, absolutely. I sort of... Look, that was always a passion of mine. I always wanted to go. I did some acting when I was younger and things like that. I did some semi-professional acting, and I also, at one stage, wanted to get into filmmaking. And it sort of explored it a little bit, made some student films, and even went to Hollywood, went to the American film market down in Santa Monica and things like that. It was all fun. Met Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, which at that time was a claim to fame. Yeah. Don't know if it's a claim to fame anymore. Claim to shame now, I think.
Yeah, I just sort of try to avoid it now. But
doesn't matter. Still plug it. Keeps.
but it was everything was fun at the time.
Yeah.
But so at that time, I made a film called Eternal Uploads. Now, the thing that was kind of interesting about Eternal Uploads, which you can actually watch on YouTube, is that I was doing this film course, and we all had to come up with a idea, like a film idea, and we had to then pitch it to the group, and everyone had to vote on the film idea. And I was on the train going into the film school, and I still hadn't come up with an idea for the film. And I just thought, I have no idea where this idea came from. But it somehow popped into my head this idea of a bloke who was terminally ill. He was dying, and he decides to cheat death by uploading his consciousness onto the internet, and so he becomes a presence on the internet.
Yeah.
And so whilst his body dies, he gets uploaded online. And it just seemed like a really crazy kind of fun idea. Anyway, so I pitched it to the group, and they loved it, and everyone wanted to do the Eternal Uploads film.
Yeah.
So we wrote a script, and we acted it out and filmed it and edited it and everything like that. And you put music to it and everything like that. It was a really fun film. And I'm actually quite embarrassed by it because it's sort of amateurish, and, you know, the acting and script writing is pretty daggy. I can't take full responsibility for the script writing because it was a group effort, but I can take responsibility for the theme and the ideas and the characters. You know, the direction, I did direct it. And whilst I feel a bit embarrassed about it and don't even like to mention it to people, when anyone looks at the film, they love it. They really love it. And they actually say, "Oh, it's really great." No, we don't think it was daggy at all. We really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, we never wanted it to end. It goes for about 15 minutes or something. And it's just it reminds me of the old style of Tropfest films. Yeah. Where, you know, when Tropfest first started, people just started, like, they'd grab a camera and they'd just shoot something really daggy in their living room about their dog.
Very grassroots,
Very grassroots. But people loved it.
That's right.
Because it was so homemade. It just made people feel very at peace with the whole thing. And then after that, I think Tropfest became a little bit too serious,
more
a little bit too professional.
Yeah.
I think that's when it lost the spirit, really.
That's right,
But so I think it's, if you want to go to YouTube, type in Eternal Uploads, and it's 2 words. And what the name, of course, implies that you can have eternal life by uploading your consciousness onto the internet. And I've since learned that there have been people who've actually proposed this. And it's interesting to note that a couple of years later, they actually made a film with Johnny Depp in it, which explored that same idea.
That's right. We're talking
and I
about that.
sometimes think, you know, I was there 2 years earlier speaking to people about it in Hollywood, and I'm wondering if someone seeded the idea and someone turned it into a feature film. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised, because you got Matrix as well. Like, that's a sort of the similar idea. Yeah. Where, like, the description on the video says a man tries to cheat death by uploading himself onto the web.
That's right.
And this was uploaded onto YouTube in 2012, but it was made in what year?
Well, it was my film was made in 2012.
Oh, okay, so it got uploaded the same year. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nice. All right.
Yeah. So 2012. But a couple of years later, I think 2014, there was a movie with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, that's right.
And since then, there's been Transcendence. There's been another film made since then called, you know, which is, I think, called Tabernacle or something.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. I think I've seen that one. Yeah. A long time ago, actually.
And
I'm looking forward to watching this because it's one, you're an Australian filmmaker, which is good, and also I love finding like things that like become cult classic sort of things. You know, like because they're made in the backyard. Like even with like iPhones, they all started from like grassroots beginning. And so the love of the story always, you know, gets people to attract us. So I'm really looking forward to this. Anyway. I'll review it next week after I come into the show next week.
Oh, cool. That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, let's finish up with this story. I put a post up, and it was a post of a boy, and a man had his arm over his shoulder, and he was, I don't know if it was a man, it was a human covered in
dressed up as Moloch.
As a bull. And the theory goes that he was dressed up as Moloch. Let's go through that story in detail, and we'll finish up with that and
it's I personally believe this is the creepiest story on ghost tours, and the thing that makes it so creepy is that it is a very real story, and it's connected with the ghost train fire at Luna Park in 1978. And for those of you who know about that, I mean, Luna Park's a very famous amusement park in Sydney. And in 1978, the old ghost train ride, which was full of accumulated dust and paper mache dolls and probably, you know, dodgy wiring and from the 1930s. It probably hadn't been upgraded. All that sort of stuff burst into flames, and it was an inferno within minutes, a firestorm. And, of course, The following morning, they found the remains of the ghost train, which was virtually nothing left, and they'd also destroyed a very famous old wooden roller coaster, the Big Dipper, and also the Tunnel of Love, which was known as the River Caves. So all of those locations were destroyed. So it's very sad, really. But the fire department and the cops, when they examined the site the following morning, initially they didn't think anyone had actually died as a result of the fire. But they actually ended up finding the bodies of 7 people, 5 young boys and a couple of parents, a father and an uncle. The mother had cheated to death by just inadvertently by going for an ice cream and not deciding to go on the ride that night. And it's interesting to note that earlier in the day, they'd been down at Circular Quay. And there's actually a YouTube video on this saying who started the Luna Park Ghost Tour and Roller Coaster Fire. It's an American documentary, about 15 minutes in length, and you've got the photograph on your website.
That's right.
It's a very creepy photo, and it shows someone dressed up as Moloch, who was the pagan god of child sacrifice, actually putting his arm around one of the children. It was taken 5 or 6 hours before that boy was actually burned to death. Now, this particular pagan god, I believe, used to apparently burn kids to death. It's a very
child
vicious
sacrifice
and things like that. Now, what I've been told is that to this day, the mother of these boys believes this was indicative of the fact that her children were going to die that night and there's nothing she could do about it. That the synchronicity was so extraordinary, the symbolism was so extraordinary, because, you know, it is this character was originally a police suspect. They never found him. They never found out who he was. He just kind of disappeared.
They never interviewed him.
They didn't find no one. Never got him. And they didn't know. They still don't know who he was. They were under the impression that maybe the guy was a serial killer or something like that. Maybe he had started the fire because. But
wouldn't there be? Was he part of some crew or was he part of like a stage?
He was just part. He was just part of There was a theatrical troupe down on the rocks. He was dressed up in an outfit, Moloch outfit. They were dressed up as pagan characters, and he approached the children, who died several hours later. And it is the fact that this is what really happened. It's not just a ghost story. It's a very creepy photo if you have a look at it. And that is one of the stories. Now, to this day, there are security staff at Luna Park who claim at the time of night that the ghost train fire occurred, they actually hear screams and they believe that these are the ghosts of the people who died on that night.
It was his brother and his father.
Yeah, brother, father. The 5 young men died on that night. 5 boys died on that night. Hideous death, shocking event, really.
Just how they that it was a bull. It could have been any other pagan god, but it was.
It happened to be the pagan god of child sacrifice.
Yeah, the Moloch and then the kid dies in fire. That is too much of a coincidence not to be true.
Yeah, it's a bit of an overcreep, isn't it? It's a little bit too spooky.
And so what happened with the mother? Do they know?
It's interesting to note that many years later, I was actually working in a call centre and I actually worked for that mother.
Get out of here.
And so I have actually met that woman. And she seemed okay. I mean, obviously it was a horrible event in her life, and she seemed all right when I knew her.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not the sort of thing that anyone gets over.
Yeah, for sure. No. Did you get to speak to her about that, or?
Look, yes, I did. This is a long time before I knew the story.
Yeah,
this
yeah.
Is
So you didn't.
This is 30 years ago.
Wow.
This is a long, long time ago, right?
So then when you found the story, you're like, I know that.
I made the link. Yeah, I made the link. I thought, oh my God, I know that woman. Yeah.
That is crazy, man.
And, I know that she described that after the event happened, she thought she was dealing with it, but she really wasn't dealing with it. It was a terrible event.
For sure, man.
But, terrible event. And to lose your kids like that. Yeah.
Let's wrap this up. I know I'll finish at 8. We're going to wrap it up so I can get the audio, everything in together. I want to say, where can we look for you guys? Internet?
Look. Well, you can either come down to Harrington Street and just walk through the door.
Yeah.
We're open after 11 a.m. every day.
So what was the address there?
It is simply the Rocks Ghost Tours. We're right next to...
I had the address. I'll bring it up now.
Yeah, no. We'll just bring up the exact street address for you. And that is... Just give you the exact. I just know exactly.
No, I had it.
what is.
I had it too. I had it up, but now my thing has been a bit silly.
Okay.
I know it's in Harrington.
It is 28 Harrington Street, The Rocks.
That's it, yeah. So you can either ring up and make a booking. The number's 9241 1283, or send an email to spirit@ghosttours.com.au. They open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. 7 days a week.
Yeah.
It's good if you have a date or something as well, and you want to make the date a bit exciting. Take a girl down there, or if you want to bring a group of people, you guys do that as well. You have theme parties. So the point of this ghost tour, why I really find it interesting, it's not one of those ghost tours where they walk around, they set up booby traps and scary like pictures or anything like that. It's actual real stories from the local area, and the hosts are very knowledgeable about it, and they walk around. Also, where can we check out for like in the future for your therapy stuff and all that stuff? Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. Philip McDONALD Hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
I'm located over a little practice in Crow's Nest.
Nice.
And if you just remember the name, or just look up Hypnotherapy Crow's Nest, I will definitely come up.
Okay, I'll link that to my page as well.
Yeah.
Are you trying to get it back into film or anything like that?
No.
No.
I just I don't, not for the time being. I might do a little creative project at some stage.
See what happens, yeah.
I'm sort of building my little therapy business at the moment. That's what I'm doing.
Nice.
But, or just go to the Rocks Ghost Tours website. You can book online as well.
No worries. So I'll link all that. I'll also get the link off you later on about the therapies that you do as well. Yeah. And I'll link up over here if any of you guys interested. Thank you so much, Phil, for coming in. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing those stories, and not only just having a talk with me, but you went into detail, which I really appreciate. And I'm sure our fans will love it as well, and they appreciate it too. Big thank you for coming in.
No worries.
Guys, if you're listening and you're still here, remember that number 9550-9552. We have the Garner Show next. Also, I'm here every Tuesday from 6 till 8. Remember to check out radioskidrow.org. Follow the support links. From there, you can help out the radio. And go to goodsmoke.com.au. It's Radio Skid Row, 88.9. Good Smoke.